Do you wish you had more control over bending your wire into shapes for jewelry making? Is it a challenge to make earrings that match or jewelry with a consistent repetitive link? Well, you're in luck because in this video I'm going to share with you 5 forming fundamentals to help you bend wire for jewelry with confidence. Hi, Jen Hanscom here from Jewelry Classes with Jen, letting you in on the inside scoop. Forming fundamentals plus patterns equals great jewelry components. Bending wire is my specialty as a jewelry instructor. I use this formula to teach people how to make consistent components with ease. Keep watching this video and you'll see it in action. First, I'll explain each of the top 5 forming fundamentals. Then I'll show you how they work together in action to form angles and curves. And then I'll explain how patterns, or measuring charts as I like to call them, work with the forming techniques to yield great jewelry components. You can watch me form a wire component following a chart and see how I get the same result as the sample piece I scanned when I made the chart years before. You'll be blown away with this system. So let's dive in. I promise, if you use these 5 forming basics, you'll gain confidence in bending wire for jewelry. So, the first forming basic is to work on a perpendicular plane. Always work on a perpendicular plane to the jaw of the pliers. You can see in this image here, I've got a piece of blue cardstock depicting what I mean. This provides the most stable grasp and helps to keep your material from slipping in the pliers and causing tool marks. The second forming basic is give up your pinching and isolate your pressure. In most cases, you want to hold the wire as stable as possible when you're forming. So use your dominant hand to hold the pliers. And then use your non-dominant hand to do the forming. So, if you're right-handed, hold the material in the grasp of the pliers held with your right hand, and set things up so the area you want to form is protruding on the left side, ready for your left hand to form. I've seen many people pinch the wire, meaning like grasp it with both their index finger and thumb at the same time to form it. You may feel as though you have more strength with this approach. However, the force being applied is not clear. And you may be applying pressure in a manner you don't realize, causing a variance in the form. It's much better to isolate your pressure to one source. The third forming basic will help you gain that strength that you were looking for. What you're really doing, though, is gaining leverage using opposing pressure braced on the tool. Once you've isolated your pressure, you can add to your force by bracing the tool with opposing pressure. So if you're forming with your thumb, brace the opposite side of the tool with your index finger to give you better leverage and add to the strength with which you are forming. The fourth forming basic, apply forming pressure in close proximity to the tool. Yep, that's right. The placement of the pressure with which you're forming has a great impact upon the result. If you apply pressure right next to the tool as you form around it, you will yield a form more accurate to the shape of the tool. If your pressure is further away, even a half inch or so, you can cause a flex further up the wire and the curve will not be as form-fitted to the tool. It does require more force to form right at the tool, but the results are much more consistent. And then our fifth and final forming basic is look down the jaw of the pliers while you're forming. This might feel a bit awkward at first, but if you look down the jaw of the pliers as you're forming, you can watch to see how far you're bending the material. This affords you the ability to stop or form more without having to adjust your view. Once you get used to this positioning, you can form more rapidly and also with more accuracy. Please take note, it may be more comfortable for you to back up a bit from the table so you won't have to cock your wrists back as far. Now, let's take a look at these principles in action. I've pulled a detailed excerpt from my fundamental lesson on forming basics to share with you. So I know that I've mentioned it in previous videos, but I do want to call your attention back to the concept of this perpendicular plane of the tool. We have the jaw of the plier goes in this direction, and then where we're working is on this perpendicular plane. While you're working, you want to be looking down the jaw of the plier. So essentially, you'd be looking at the flat surface that you're creating. And so all of your bending is going to be on this plane. And so the reason for that is because this positioning, working perpendicular to the grasp of the plier, it gives you the best leverage and the most stability so that you can do things well, form things well. So that being said, your tool is really a holder. I know a lot of people think about the tool as being what you're working with, but I want to switch your mindset to the concept that the tool is really holding the wire that you're working with, and then you are forming it with your other hand. But you want to have the tool in your dominant hand so that you can have a nice solid grip, and you want your most strength to be in holding the wire. So got a little example here. All right, these happen to be wires that I did in the flesh cutting lesson. But now that we know that we're working on a perpendicular plane, the other thing is that the shape or the form that the wire will take is going to be around whatever the tool is that you form it around. So if you're trying to make a right angle bend, you're going to use a chain nose plier or a flat plier. Things that either one works because they both have that flat edge. They have the flat hold on the inside and they have a flat edge. So the flat plier just gives you a little bit more grip, and the chain nose plier is a little bit smaller at the tip, so you can hold more detailed stuff. So I'm going to just work with the flat plier for now. And I just want to demonstrate how you would go about making a right angle bend. And so with the plier or with the wire in place in the tool, clear some of the stuff out from the background so you can see a little bit better. We have the wire on the perpendicular plane in the tool. At the moment, it's just a straight line, so it only has one dimension. We're about to add a second dimension when we make a form. And then we're going to cock our wrist so that you're looking directly down the jaw of the plier. Then you're going to, we want to have the plier grasping so that the metal that we're forming is sticking out the side of our non-dominant hand. So in my case, I'm right-handed. I have the plier in my right hand, and I'm going to be using my left hand. Now, in an ideal world, we typically are going to push away from ourselves with our thumb because that's how we have the most strength. There is an exception. Some people have a thumb joint that hyperextends, and the top tip of their thumb can press way back. And so if you happen to have a joint like that in your thumb, you may find it easier to use your index finger towards you. And so you will see that in the video as well. And so you'll be able to switch that up as needed. But so if you happen to be one of those people that has a hyperextended joint in your thumb, you might find this a little bit difficult to hold that joint solid in order to press. But want to brace our index finger on the back side of the tool. So that just gives us a little bit more leverage, a little bit more strength, so that when we push with our thumb, now notice I don't want to have the pressure further away from the tool. I want to have the pressure right up against the tool so that it's as close to what I'm forming around as possible. I've got my wrist cocked, so I'm looking down the jaw of the plier, and I'm pushing that wire literally right into the edge of the tool as hard as I can. You can see all the blood loss in my finger. And so what happens is that you get this nice straight edge, and it's formed, and it's pretty close to the edge of the tool. Now this happens to be 16 gauge wire, and so that's a little bit heavier, so it's going to take a little bit, there's going to be a little bit softer curve in a 16 gauge wire just naturally because it's a heavier metal. It doesn't bend quite as sharply. And so when I release the plier, you can see the side that I was holding is a little bit straighter than the side that I bent. And so then you can come over to the other side of that joint and you can crimp down on here, squeeze that, and you can see that by squeezing it, it pushed that joint open a bit because it had a little bit of a curve in the wire, and so then I can press that side. And so you might find that you need to do that in order to get a really sharp right angle bend, so that it could be that you weren't able to push the wire enough to really make it 90 degrees, because remember we have this plastic deformation, right? And because of the spring nature of our wire, you have to push it a little bit beyond where you want it to stay. So that gives us that ability to correct that after the fact. So if you're really looking for a sharp bend, you want to just crimp that other side, push the initial one. And so now that I've created a second dimension, when I put that in my plier to bend again, I need to look not just at the profile view this way, but from the side view as well, to make sure that both of those dimensions are on that same perpendicular plane. And so with my perpendicular plane adjusted, that allows me to then go ahead, again, I've got my index finger braced on the outside of the tool, and I can go ahead and bend that. And then in order to sharpen that bend, I can squeeze on this side and then push that one in just a touch. So when I set that down on a surface, if I haven't gone off plane, it would sit flat on the table. It might be hard to see on film, but this other tail over here, you can see when I press down on it, the other lifts. It's because the plane is off just a little bit. So let me show you that from the side view. You can see that this tail is just off plane from the other one just slightly. So every time that you make a curve, or you form, bend, flex, whatever you want to call it, to the wire, you want to fix all of your planes to the best of your ability. So like I said, the wire is going to take on the shape of the tool. So if I use a curve tool to hold my wire and I press to make a bend, again, I use that opposing pressure and I use my thumb pressure nice and close. You can see I get the curve of the tool as my bend. And if everything is on the same plane, then we're looking good, and that should sit nice and flat on the surface. Now, sometimes you make one bend and then the next bend you want to go back in the opposite direction. So after you've created one bend, what you can do is you can turn your tool around. So in this case, I want to have the curved surface towards me. The one that I'm going to curve around is facing towards me. I'm looking down the jaw of the plier. Double check all of my perpendicular plane. And this time I'm going to brace with my thumb, and I'm going to use my index finger to bend it towards me. And so I've still got that same nice soft bend. Now if I want to use one of the other steps to get a different size curve, I can hold down in that step. So again, I want to adjust everything, make sure that I'm on my perpendicular plane. And then I can, bracing with my index finger, pushing with my thumb, rotate that around. And you can see I get whatever the shape of the, let's call it a pin or a forming pin that you're curving around, is the wire is going to take that shape when you have that nice close pressure. And it's going to follow quite nicely. Now, if I were to press from a distance, my pressure is over here. When I go around, you can see it doesn't necessarily follow the curve of the tool. The wire starts to pull away from the tool. I don't get a nice curve that follows the tool itself. So now I'm going to just switch the tool around so that I can form in the opposite direction so I don't hit the tail of the wire. Checking that perpendicular plane here. And this time I'm going to come back towards myself. Again, my pressure is nice and close this time. And you can see that that pressure then, the wire follows the contour of the tool and we get a nice accurate shape. And so if I want to curve that a little bit more, I can rotate it so that the flat part of the tool is holding in a different area, and then that way I can continue curving to get all the way around to a loop. But you see I've got that nice curve that literally fits the step of the tool quite accurately the whole way. So if you want to have a larger curve, then you would just use a larger tool. This one happens to be the bale plier, and it's got two round sides. So I don't want to squeeze too tightly with this tool because it'll crimp the wire, but you can form around the smaller side. Or if I have the larger side towards me, because this next curve I'm going to curve towards me, make sure everything is on that perpendicular plane. Look down the jaw. This next one I'm bracing here and forming here, and you can see that that came towards me that way. I gotta fix my plane a little bit. But you can see that I've got the smaller curve here and the larger curve here. If I wanted to curve that a little bit more, I can sit in that curve and I can continue curving. And so I could feel that I was going off plane a little bit while I was doing that. You want to hold the pressure so that the wire stays on the perpendicular plane. And sometimes when you go off plane, it means that you're either pushing down with your finger or up with your thumb, or somehow you're adjusting that plane. So every time you do make a bend, you want to just double check the plane. So if I wanted to make some right angle bends at particular marks, let's try this out. If I have 1/2 inch increments marked on my wire, push away, move to the next one, double check my plane. I'm perpendicular on this plane here, but when I look at that side view, it's rotated. So I want to make sure that everything is on the perpendicular plane. And then I'll look down the jaw of the plier again. Notice that when I'm trying to make a bend at the mark is just beyond the left side of the tool. So then that way when I go to form this, that mark is going to be right in the middle of that right angle bend. You can crimp your right angle bends. Double check your plane. And so then let's say I want to have a loop up here. Well, if I hold on this way, which is essentially the upside down one, but sideways a little bit easier to manage, and I reach around here, I can go ahead and make a loop. Then in order to fix the plane on a loop, I want to double check that the end of the loop is in alignment with the whole thing, and then I can flex the whole loop to be in alignment with the rest of the piece, and that gives me a fun little funky piece. So random pieces, well, I've just been kind of let's call it it's like doodling, right? I just made random bends. I showed you some different things. And so, you know, it's not always easy to know just exactly how to bend in order to make a piece that you're really happy with. So that is why I use measuring charts. So let me give you a little taste of what happens when you have a measuring chart to go by. Okay, so this is a layout for a sample of a measuring chart. Now, I'm like the home of measuring charts made easy, right? So you knew measuring charts were going to come into the picture here at some point. So this is just an introduction, and so this may not make a lot of sense to you at this juncture, but that's okay because I haven't really explained it yet. But I want to show you the power that it gives you to have a chart telling you where to do what bend so that you can come out with a shape that you like and that is not just a waste of your time. So my measuring chart is for 18 gauge wire. This is the result that I'm looking for, this drop. It's I've got a piece of 18 gauge wire. And so the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to flush cut the end of my wire. Because remember, you can't measure anything without having a nice flush cut. Then I'm going to hold my wire to my measuring chart. And I'm going to mark the overall length of the chart onto my wire. And then I'm going to flush cut that other end, right? So I've now flush cut my wire to length. Then I'm going to file the blunt ends flat so that I can file away that little seam that the cutter leaves. Filing that until it's flat, flip it over, filing that until it's flat. Remember, it just takes a few strokes and the file does most of the work for you. Don't need to use a lot of pressure. And then here I have a twin cut cup burr that's appropriate for 18 gauge wire fitted into my pin vise. Use a little bit of lubricant here. And I'm going to use that to deburr the ends of my wire. Now this was all covered in another video. I just thought I would kind of show you how it comes into play. This is kind of like the big picture for the basics of forming the jewelry classes with Genway with measuring charts. Then I'm going to set the wire down onto my measuring chart, and I'm going to transfer all of my marks, my segment marks. Now I've got a couple of different elements here. I've got diameter curves, which is just a curve that's equal to the, uses the amount of material for that's the same as the diameter of the tool that you're using. I have a few just spaces. It's just an increment that's measured out for some sharp bends. And then at the end here I have what I call a teardrop rollback loop, which is a loop like the one that connection loop that I showed you just a minute ago. So I'm going to rotate it around and I'm going to start with the loop. And so when I do these teardrop rollback loops, I have a grasp point so that they come out exactly the same every time. However, it should be equal to the outside edge of the round step of the tool. And so then with my index finger braced on the tool, I'm going to use my thumb. I'm going to form that around the tool. Notice I'm rotating my my wrist that's holding the pliers, my right wrist, as well, so that I can reach a little bit further around. So if I'm holding it the original way, I went from 9 o'clock and now I'm almost all the way to 3 o'clock. Now that I have a little bit of a curve formed, I can rotate the tool so that the flat side of the tool is bracing in another area so that I can curve a little bit more. Do that one more time just so that I can get that so that the loop will actually close there. Okay, so I've got my teardrop rollback loop. And then I've got spaces. And you can see I want to have a sharp bend at that next mark. And so I'm going to use the chain nose pliers because the flat ones don't fit there. And so I want to place that mark so that it's to the left side of my tool. I want to make sure that everything is on the perpendicular plane. You see that loop is rotated up a little bit, so I want to make sure I put that on the perpendicular plane. And then I'm going to give that a sharp bend towards me, even more than 90 degrees. You can see from the picture, right? If I hold it here and then I'm kind of looking at that picture, you can see I went nice and sharp. And so I can pinch the other side of that sharp bend in order to straighten the wire there and press this side a little bit. Notice I'm pressing just the outside of that loop this time. And then our next mark is another sharp bend. So I'm going to hold here. Now if I have enough space, I can go and I can use the flat pliers. You can see that my increment is 1/4 of an inch, and that happens to be the width of this tool. So I could use the tool as my measurement. But you know, a lot of times if you already have the chain nose plier in your hand, you just end up using them again. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to do that next flex. Again, I want to have a really sharp bend beyond 90 degrees. And then I'm going to use the plier to crimp this other side so that it's as straight as I can get that. So there we go. Looking a lot like our picture. Okay, so now I have diameter curve 1 and diameter curve 2. My diameter curve 1 is this next section. Let you look at that. Focus. I'm going to set this down. And you can see that my little sample is coming out pretty much just like the sketch I have. But this diameter curve segment is going to be a curve in between those two marks that curves around the wrap and tap pliers, the small step. So these are my wrap and tap pliers. The small step is this one here. So I'm going to hold it this way so that I can reach, and I'm going to grasp at the mark on the right with the center of the round. Make sure everything is on the perpendicular plane. And then I'm going to press in here. In fact, I'm going to pinch this in this case just in order to get the pressure in the right place so that I want to curve until I get to that other mark. There's a mark there. And so in an ideal world, you can see the straight line drawn through this component here. When something is dangling, we want to have an evenly distributed weight. And so I want to curve that until this mark would come over in a line to that main center. So I'm going to go ahead and curve even more. Now if I can reach, I can hold over here and curve that a little bit that way. And so now we should be a little bit closer. And so I curved just a slight bit too much, but that'll be okay. And then the very bottom of the wire, it curves around the bail pliers, the large side. And so in order to do that, I want to curve around the large side, so I'm going to hold the large side close to me because, you know, I want the wire to go in this kind of zigzaggy pattern. And so I'm going to hold as close as I can to the end of the wire. Look at that, double check my plane, and then I'm going to just reach down and I'm going to curve that so that it follows that step. And that just gets that little tail to frame back around. And so just double check that I correct all of my planes so that my piece sets flat. And then when I put that on my little target pattern, you can see that I get quite a regular shape. And this was plotted out years ago. And yeah, I can look at my chart, I can take my tools, and I can achieve the same shape in that short period of time. So that is the benefit of having a measuring chart. Because if I just picked up a wire, and even if I had an increment measured and I just started making some sharp bends and curves, it's not necessarily going to be exactly what I'm looking for it to be. And so that is the big benefit of having the measuring charts, so you know what curve to do at what place. And so the whole philosophy behind measuring charts made easy is how to make these measuring charts for yourself so that you can go ahead and just make something that you desire to make right off the bat, and you don't have to fiddle around with the doodle of, well, if I form this or if I form that, what, you know, you're not just doodling, you're going at a project with a direction, and therefore you have a better chance of getting a great result right off the bat. So I hope you took these forming and bending basics to heart. You may watch this video over and over again. I will touch on these subjects in almost all the lessons. I'll try to throw in little reminders, but this is really the comprehensive description of how to form the wires. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, the combination of solid forming fundamentals paired with patterns or measuring charts is the crux of my teaching style. And I've helped hundreds of jewelry makers gain confidence in their forming skills while guiding them to make jewelry they're proud to wear and show off to their friends. So download your free guide today. You'll gain insight into my philosophy and get a concise introduction to my Measuring Charts Made Easy system. It's the secret to creating consistent jewelry components with ease in 3 easy steps. Step 1, create cardstock measuring tools for each design element. Step 2, use those measuring tools to draft a pattern to yield a specific component. Step 3, follow that measuring chart to form the component with consistent results. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I strive to share all the jewelry making tips and tricks I wish I learned when I first started making jewelry over 20 years ago. So you won't want to miss any new videos when they're published.